Okay, so let's move on to Dan Quinn's old team, the Dallas Cowboys, starting on offense. What do you got for us?
I'm very curious with this Cowboys offense who their third pass catcher is going to be. You have CeeDee Lamb, who's one of the better receivers in the league, can work in the slot, but also line up outside if needed. You have Jake Ferguson, who really came on, especially towards the end of last season and had the second highest target share on this team. And I think is a pretty good tight end, but you lost about 20% of your target share with Tony Pollard and Michael Gallup not on the Cowboys anymore. And you didn't really bring in anyone notable in free agency. So I assume that the third pass catcher will be Brandon Cooks, but he wasn't super productive last year. Jalen Tolbert kind of fell in that same boat. So, and then you also have Kevontae Turpin, who can be used on gadget plays as well, but maybe he gets an expanded role. So what Dallas does with their secondary receiving options is going to be one of the more interesting storylines, I think, to follow this season.
Yeah, it was fun to watch last year because early on, kind of before their bye week, they have a ton of CeeDee Lamb in the slot, as you should. He's an unbelievable player from the slot. And I think they were trying to figure out, well, how do we deal with this issue where even last year, I feel like they didn't have a ton of outside production. So they just said, you know what? Let's move CD outside too. And I thought that was an inspired choice. Like that was a pretty smart where, yeah, build the literal entire plane out of CeeDee Lamb. And unfortunately, you may have to do that. And I mean, this guy's going to have so many targets this year. He is going to have so much. I hope he gets paid, obviously, and certainly before the season. But I mean, like CeeDee Lamb's usage is going to be off the charts, right?
Oh yeah, I think that there's a reason why he's so coveted in fantasy drafts right now. Like he's going to get so many targets and then going to get a lot of money, because of that before the season here.
Tage, I am not going to miss a chance to talk about Dak Prescott. He is a quarterback that is consistently playing on hard mode where he is always resetting the protections. He is getting the offense into their best looks. And he is one of the best pre-snap processors that we have in the entire league. He was tied for second in big time throws last year. And he also had one of the lowest turnover worthy throw rates. He had the highest EPA per dropback when he was pressured in the entire league. He was almost a positive player where every single player has a negative EPA on plays that he was pressured, but he was the closest to that positive part of the distribution. He throws a ridiculous seam ball that feels like it just gets up and down just against all physics. And he is going to get paid a whole lot of money by someone.
he will as well. Yeah, I think that the holdup around his contract has definitely been interesting and given us some drama this offseason. But whether he gets extended right before the season here or he ends up becoming and hitting the open market as a free agent next year, like there is a lot of money to be paid towards him. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for Dak again behind this offensive line again this year. I think that my questions and concerns about their secondary receiving options are relatively minor compared to what he can do when he is playing at a high level. And I think that when you see him on play action boot plays, he is elite at those and really good when he's moving outside of the pocket. And I think Mike McCarthy understood that last year. They had the fifth highest play action rate in the league, and Dak was really good off of those, really good when pressured, like you mentioned, and is someone that can really just elevate his game to fit kind of the situation that he's in.
Yeah, this year's every year's a make or break for pretty much every team, but McCarthy on the last year of his contract doesn't have a new deal in hand. Dak at the end of his contract. CD at the end of his contract. It's going to be so interesting to see, but I'm glad you mentioned the offensive line there because I think their offensive line is going to be able to mesh together well. Watching some of the Tyler Guyton clips from practice is just sick. Like that guy is such a strong anchor. So that is really fun. I do want to touch on this real quick, just like the Dak Prescott in the playoffs thing, because I go on this long rant about Dak Prescott. I'm certainly a believer in him, but I think people point to the playoff performance where Dak himself will say, this wasn't my best game. I do think he has. I saw a stat where like offensive performance against him, he's like one of the highest in that stat. So just other teams are also doing really well there. Well, that can be true while Dak also hasn't played his best games in the playoffs. How do we handle that?
I think you bring up a really good point here, and I really try not to put any more stock in playoff performance than I do in regular season performance, because when you have a big sample of games and of plays in the regular season, I think that really tells you which certain players are good and which aren't good. And I think that when you use these one-off games in the playoffs as your sample size of evaluating players, that really just narrows the information that you have available on them. And I look at someone like Matthew Stafford, who didn't have great playoff performances when he was in Detroit, went 0-3 in them, and that didn't matter at all when he went on the playoff run with the Rams and ended up winning the Super Bowl. I think that you have these other quarterbacks that have just happened to have faced Mahomes in multiple years, where it's probably lowered the perception of them, like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, where you have a lot of regular season performance to show that they're really good. And I'm pretty confident that they'll have their breakthrough at some point in their career. And I think Dak also falls in that bucket, where he's been a very, very good regular season quarterback for multiple years now. Playoffs have had, a lot of variance in those games, with not only falling behind early in some of them, but also running into the buzzsaw of the 49ers defense in a couple of those years. And so I still think that you can feel confident about him going into the playoffs, even though some people might not be this year.
Yeah, and we'll see if Dak Prescott has to live the Matthew Stafford life, where maybe people appreciate him more if he goes out of Dallas to go somewhere else and has some success. Tage, let's move to the defensive side of the ball for the Dallas Cowboys. We have to talk about Mike Zimmer. I'm really excited for Mike Zimmer there. It's going to look a lot different in Dallas from a scheme perspective. We're going to see way more quarters. We're going to, even in just these preseason games, watching some of these clips, seeing some of the unblocked pressures that they have cooked up, how their safeties are kind of playing in quarters a little bit. It looks so different. It feels so different. This is one of those coordinator changes where you can see it pretty quickly on a schematic level. And I think Cowboys fans should be excited about that, because Tish, I love Dan Quinn. I do think that this might be able to serve them better a little bit later in the season for some of those games that it's gonna get tough late on that schedule, and certainly as you get into the playoffs, of course, that part of that is going to come down to, well, who are the bodies in that linebacker room that you're going to be able to have in different ways and avoid some of the issues that you got with Green Bay. Tish, where do you want to start from a stats perspective with the Cowboys?
I'm glad that you brought up Mike Zimmer there, because his superpower when he was in Minnesota as a defensive game planner and play caller was what he can do to you on third down. And he led the league, pretty consistently in defensive EPA on third down. And I think that with these pass rushers that he has available to him in Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Osha Adigezua, I think that there's a lot of confidence in what he can end up scheming up from a pass rush perspective. They had the highest pressure rate and highest pass rush win rate in the league last year. And you really have the bodies capable of taking expected pass situations for offenses and putting them into a blender there. But I do think that teams are going to end up running on them a lot because of this. The Cowboys were 10th in success rate against dropbacks last season, but 32nd in success rate against rushes. And I think because of their nose tackle situation, teams will want to run on them and have in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how Mike Zimmer accounts for that, because I think that they're going to be very good when teams are in situations when they have to pass, but it'll be a little bit tougher to emulate that performance when teams are going to want to run the ball.
Yeah, I mean, at the linebacker spot, you have Eric Kendricks, who's, he can still play ball. He's obviously at a different point of his career. Tage, would you like to take a second to talk about this idea that Michael Parsons maybe plays linebacker or just has way more snaps at that position?
I hope that's a smokescreen, because we saw that at Penn State, and it led to him dropping a little bit in the draft. I think that LSU made that same mistake with Harold Perkins last year, where they moved him from edge rusher to linebacker, and we kind of saw history repeating itself there. So I'm really hoping that Michael Parsons stays as a primary edge rusher, because that's really where his best ability is. I mean, he is arguably the best edge rusher in the NFL.
Yeah, I have to assume he's going to take certainly the most snaps at edge rusher. Maybe you could say something about, we want to move Micah around a little bit. Like they did move him inside over the center as a pass rusher. Maybe it's, we got to move him at that linebacker spot just for a different look as a rusher. But I mean, a down-to-down linebacker, I'm not pretending like that's what the reports are or anything like that. But just, it's always interesting to track where people's snaps are at